Hello, everyone. Today is December 1st, 2021. I hope everyone had a good Thanksgiving. This is the Atlanta FileMaker Developers Group. We're still meeting virtually. So thanks, everyone, for coming in online. Our presenter today is Dave Graham from Proof Plus Geist. He's going to be presenting on Otto, their their FileMaker Server deployment automation tool. So Dave, please take it away.
All right. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, you sound good.
All right. So, and I'm hoping you can see my screen okay.
Yes.
Great. Thanks for having me. Otto is kind of much bigger than just migrations. It's a way to kind of supercharge your FileMaker server and provides you with a whole bunch of developer operations utilities that go far beyond just taking a clone and bringing data into the clone, which the core of Otto, like other similar tools on the market, just relies on the FileMaker data migration tool. So what is Otto? It's a server-side component, and we have Otto installed on 2 different demo servers that we're going to be accessing. I'm just going to jump right into the demo and show you what it looks like. And let's see if it actually wants to cooperate. There we go. So when you log into the Otto console, you're going to have some configuration, and then the heart of it is a list of migrations. I probably want to be on my production demo server. There are some things in the Otto console that kind of line up with what you might see in the FileMaker server admin console. So things like a log viewer and file manager, or maybe a list of databases and connected clients. We do things a little bit differently, and we're going to get into some of the variations of that, time permitting. But you can see it's just a web service that runs on your server, and whether you have 2 or more servers, you're going to install the Otto service on every one of your servers. Now, how do you interact with it? Otto was designed from the ground up to provide a RESTful API endpoint for performing migrations. And what that means is you don't need any FileMaker plugins to accomplish this. You could do it with just an API call. So if you want to interact with Otto using Postman or any other tool at your disposal for performing those migrations, you don't need anything else. You can just handle your auth to Otto and send it the payload, and that will describe what's going to happen. Now, we originally designed an example file that was written in FileMaker to show you how to interact with the API. We had intended for it to be just an example of how you might do your own custom migration workflows. What people were telling us over time is that they really liked Migrator and they wanted it to do more stuff. So we added feature after feature, and it kind of became its own product. But you can think of it as a front end for Otto. So I've downloaded a copy of Migrator. This is not configured in any way, and I'm just going to start right here with the README. And we're going to step through and configure this and connect to your servers and do everything that you would do if you were just starting out from scratch. So what it tells me to do is use this default encryption key. Why do we encrypt it by default? Because you should, since there are sensitive credentials that you're storing in the file, usernames, passwords, encryption keys for the files that you're migrating and such. So you start out by encrypting it. So I'm just going to paste that in there. And then we're going to follow the instructions here in the README. I'm just going to log in with first run and no password. Migrator, when it first opens, just gives you some warnings about, securing your file, but also securing your connections with a SSL certificate. Agree to the terms and continue, and then you'll choose a permanent password. you get a notice that you can test out Otto free of charge for as long as you want. There's no time limit on the trial, so long as you're migrating a file that's called Geist_interactive_Otto. We'll probably rename or add support for proofgeist_Otto at some point. And it launches you right into the wizard to set up your servers. So I'm going to go ahead and plug that in. My demo one server is at, this is the host name, Otto-demo-1. So I'm just going to copy. I'm going to remove all this stuff. All I want is the domain. We're going to keep the default port 3030. Now, if you had any problems with this, so like if I did something like this, it's going to check before you continue on, and that should time out pretty quickly. I think it takes about 10 seconds waiting for a response, maybe 20 seconds. All right, so it's telling you didn't respond and provide some helpful information to maybe correct that mistake. The number one problem that we are seeing with Otto is networking and ports and firewalls and making sure that you can see the servers and that the servers can see each other. So this may seem trivial. If you've got your server set up and you have your SSL certificates that match your fully qualified domain names and all that, then this might be a breeze for you. So I'm going to plug in my credentials for this server. And you can see that it connected and it gave me the green light. But if I had maybe typed in the wrong password, here again, it's going to do a little bit of checking. And so we're trying to help you through this process and ensure that you have a successful configuration to perform your migrations. So we'll set up the next server, and this is demo 2. Oops. Gonna have to change that password now. These are all behind a firewall anyway, so it's really not that big of a deal, but we have our server set up. Now you'll notice that I skipped over a client field. If you're a consultant and you use Otto with an array of clients, that field is for you, and it's just a way of quickly identifying which servers belong to which one of your clients. But it's an optional field. So we have our dev server, which is demo 1, and we have our production server, which is demo 2. Incidentally, there are some features that you can use right from here. So for instance, if I wanted to just pull a file list and get one of these files that I'm working with here as a clone or a copy, I could just bring down a copy directly from the server. Now you might be thinking, hey, I could do that with the FileMaker Server admin console, but that requires you to stop the hosting of that file, which kicks everyone out of it, and then you can download it, and then you have to open it back up again and let everyone know, hey, you can get back into it. The way we do it is we just run a backup, and then we grab the backup file and then bring that down to your desktop. You can see that just showed up right there. All right, I'm going to pause for a second, see if anyone has any questions so far. Feel free to unmute yourself and just let me know.
So you've got a local file here, and then the Otto service is installed on each FileMaker server that you want to manage.
That's right. So you're noticing that the migrator file can be anywhere because we're communicating with Otto via RESTful API. So we're just sending an HTTP call. Now, there is a reason why you might want to host this file, and I'll show you that in a minute. There's actually more than one reason, but you don't need to. It could be local on your desktop. Anything else before we move on? So there's some really cool side benefits that you get from the way that we set Migrator up. So for instance, you may have noticed that when we connected, we pulled down the FileMaker Server version and the Otto version. Now we can jump to the admin console of either Otto or FileMaker Server, and we can refresh that data in any way. So maybe you don't have a very rigorous software deployment strategy for the few servers that you manage, but you might want to know if your FileMaker Server versions are out of date, and or your Otto versions are out of date, and know which ones that you need to go patch. So that's kind of useful. We're using the Otto API to grab both of those versions. All right. I want to make sure that I've got chat open here just in case. Feel free to use chat. I'm going to glance over at chat occasionally. If you have a question and you'd rather not unmute your mic, feel free to type it in there and we'll address that. So I have my servers configured. Now let's go do something with it. And I'm going to choose the server that I'm coming from. This is typically my development server. And then I'm going to choose the server or servers that I'm going to. Now, I only have one other destination server, but you can imagine that you maybe you're an SBA or you've got some complex kind of environment where maybe you have a utility file that you deploy to all of your client servers. And there may be 30 of them listed in here. So Migrator allows you to do this kind of batching where it will perform these migrations from a single source to multiple destinations. For the purpose of the demo, though, I think I'm just going to keep it simple. One server coming from, this is your development server, and a server that you're going to. You'll notice that there's a radio button here. If your file existed at on a publicly or available website from the production server, then you could just post the base URL right there, and the files will be drawn from that URL instead of a FileMaker server. But if you keep it as a FileMaker server, it's going to run a backup of all of the files in your migration and generate clones of those or copies, depending on how you want to do this. So I'm going to plug all this information in. I don't have encryption keys for the demo file that I'm going to be testing with. Is this one. And you can name them differently on your development server and your production server, but by default, they assume that you'll want to name them the same. Sometimes you'll have a file that you don't want to migrate, you just want to copy. So maybe the data in your development environment is the data that gets pushed over. And in that case, you can just indicate that it's going to be a copy and the icon changes. So you can tell right at a glance whether you're migrating or copying. And sometimes you might want to do an initial kind of seed migration where you're sending copies over, and then from that point over, once you have the files on your production server, after that, you'll do a standard migration. Now, the credentials up here, we are assuming that those credentials are the same for every file in your migration. You can have a number of files in here. So if I opened this chooser and I selected all of them and just threw them all in here, we're assuming that these credentials apply to all of these files. But if there was one of them that had different credentials, we could override any of those on a file-by-file basis. And we can deselect files. So maybe I have all of these in my set, but for this moment, I'm only going to send that file. So you don't have to actually remove them from your config. You could just simply uncheck them. And that allows you to quickly include them in a later migration. So if you have a structure like we do with Carbon, where there are multiple files that kind of participate in your solution, or you've got this legacy system where you might have dozens of files, because back in the day, FileMaker was a single table per file. In those cases, then you can just manage which ones you want to migrate based on the changes that are in that file. In this case here, though, I'm just going to deselect all of them and just go with that one. And oh, I think I may have just found a bug. Absolutely. So I would have to remove them one by one if I wanted to do that. I think I'm going to have to consider that, fixing that. But in any case here, this is the file that I'm intend to migrate for my demo. Let's go into some of the options. And if you've used the FileMaker data migration tool, then you'll recognize this, but the format's slightly different. So in the FileMaker data migration tool, they have ignore options. And for some reason, when you say ignore value lists or you say ignore fonts or ignore accounts, I don't even know what that means. And I have to really think, what am I ignoring? Am I ignoring them on the dev file, on the clone, or am I ignoring the production? And so we reworded it to just say, if you want to use the accounts from your dev server where they're coming from, or you want to use the accounts in your production server where they're going to, you just will choose the options that make the most sense. We could spend a little bit of time talking about some of these options. But I think I'm going to skip this for now, and then we can come back to it if time permits. So now I'm going to just play this migration. I could schedule it for later. This is one of those reasons why I mentioned you might want to host this file. Otto doesn't have a scheduler built in. We use the FileMaker Server scheduler to kick off scheduled migrations. So you would put this file on the server that's going to run that schedule, and it's just a FileMaker script schedule, the same kind of script schedule you would run in any of your FileMaker files, except it would perform a migration script in this file. And we're not going to schedule it now. We'll just do right away. Sometimes you add schema in the process of development, and you need to populate that schema with data, or you need to do some post-processing tasks like data transformation of your existing data. And the way you do that is with a post-migration script. So you can choose to run a post-migration script on any of the servers that are in the migration. You just simply choose a file that's in the migration and give it a script name and an optional parameter. And after the migration's done, it'll perform that script. So you can think of a common use case for this is maybe I just added a status table. And this is not a user table where people are going to be entering information. This is something that you would maybe add, 5 statuses from pending to posted or something like that. So you add that schema in dev, you create a post-migration script that fills it with the data that you expect with the right IDs and values, and then you configure this post-migration script to run. But for the purpose of this demo, I'm going to skip over that. Now, this one says that I am doing multiple destinations, which is interesting because I'm not. So I think I found a bug. But I'm just going to bypass that by giving it a save folder name. Now, save folders are commonly used for a couple things, a couple reasons. When the files are on a server, when the files on the dev server are really big, it might take longer than 2 minutes to create clones of those files. And so we have to split the process up to prevent the request from timing out, essentially. So, but you might also use this feature for doing things like versions. So maybe I want to do V1, and then I want to just kick off a migration and see what happens here. I kind of hope that things don't work right in a demo, because the same types of things that I run into when I'm demoing Otto and Migrator are the same types of things that you usually run into when you're trying to set it up for the first time. And I think that information sometimes is kind of useful, but we'll see. So by default, it refreshes status every 30 seconds. I'm just going to click on check now. You can see this is a pretty simple file. So it only took 15 seconds. And unfortunately, this was successful. I was hoping for a problem, but you can see that it worked. The Geist interactive Otto file doesn't have a whole lot of tables or records in it. So this is the result of the data migration tool log. And if you've used that tool, then this will look familiar. All right. So that was the basic migration. Now I'm going to close this file. And that one's on my desktop, but I'm going to open a demo file that I have on my server. So this one is on the server, and I've got a bunch of different migrations. This is the same type of migration that that I just did, but this is a hosted version of that file, and I'm just going to step through that and kick that off. Just make sure that that this happens before we get into some more complex examples. Incidentally, the migrator file is fully unlocked. You can change it if you'd like. However, I'm going to give you a reason why you might not want to change it. When we release new versions of Migrator, and we're constantly expanding the feature set in Migrator based on our customer feedback and the needs of our services teams, we'll constantly release new versions of Migrator. You could actually use Otto and Migrator to migrate itself. So this is kind of cool, right? I'm going to actually do a little segue here, since we have plenty of time to play around a little bit. So I'm going to do upload to host, and we'll do the dev server, and we will just call this one Migrator New. So this is a newer version of Migrator, and oops, I should put it in secure so it can open it automatically. So we have both the old and the new migrators on the server at once. This is kind of an interesting use case. So this one is 226, and this one is an unreleased version prior to 226. So where do I want to do this? I think I'll do this in this file. And I'm going to create a new migration for this, and we'll just call this one update migrator. It's kind of like a snake eating its tail. It's kind of interesting how you can do this. So I'm choosing the same from and destination from and to servers. Now, the only thing that would make this fail is if I haven't licensed it, but I think I did license it. So if we were using the demo, we'd have a problem because of the file name. All right, so let's take a look at this. We're coming from the dev server to the dev server. My credentials should be set properly, and I'm migrating the new version of Migrator to the old one. So you can see my old one has a bunch of different migration records and a lot of history and stuff that I might not want to lose if I upgrade to a new version of Migrator. So let's step through this and see what happens. At some point here pretty soon, it's going to tell me to close out of that file. So if your users are actually in a file that you're attempting to migrate, you can see that it attempts an automatic close in 30 seconds, and then it will hard disconnect them after 2 minutes. I'm going to close that one, and it should get started here pretty soon. Is this cool for anyone? Does this only excite me? I want to hear from you. Everyone's muted.
I think it's very cool. I like it a lot. This seems very
Snake eating the tail. Snake eating his tail. That's very cool.
Right? So I have my fingers crossed here pretty tightly. I'm hoping this works. This is going to be pretty neat. I hadn't intended this to be part of the demo, but it says it was successful. So let's try it out. So I'm going to open Migrator. Check my version, 226, and there's all my data. So that's pretty cool. All right, what else could we talk about? Batch migration. So multiple files. I'm not going to step through every single one of these because it's kind of boring. You see the same kind of thing behind the scenes, but I want to step through some of these use cases at least. So multiple files on a single destination. So if you are going to, let's say, Otto demo 1 to Otto demo 2, and maybe you've got the same file duplicated multiple times, but it's named something different. So we can come in here and we can duplicate that file. So here it might be called demo 1. And here it might be called demo 2. So that's one use case. Some of our SBAs, they have they deploy a set of files where they may host multiple clients on a same server, and that same file goes to multiple destinations named differently. So this is not a very common use case, but definitely is something that we've seen. What is a more common use case is when you want to do multiple destinations. So I can just click all of these. And maybe at the moment, I just don't want to send it to this one. I'll keep it in the config, and I can always come back in here later and just simply turn that on when I need to. We've got some edge cases here where we will test for credentials where there's a space in the username, or, oh, this is actually the case that I had mentioned before. This is the SBA example where we're deploying the same files to multiple destinations. And we have the ability to schedule these migrations. So let's see, is this one? This one doesn't have any data in it. I think I'm going to go back here. I'm just going to use this one as a guinea pig here. So if I step into this and say, hey, I want to schedule this for later, where are we creating the schedule? Because if you remember, the way that we schedule this is we create a FileMaker script schedule in FileMaker Server, and it just calls a script in this file, right? So what we're saying is, what is your migrator account name and the password for migrator, and when do we want to schedule it for? Now, I can schedule it for some time in the past as a way of just making sure that it will work, but it will create a disabled script schedule. So let's see. Oh, I need to click on this button. Yeah. So I'm going to skip through the rest of this, and you'll see instead of perform this migration, now you have a schedule, and you've got an icon to indicate that that's happening at some future time. So that one, we ran the schedule on demo 1. Let me switch over to that. And actually, I need the admin console. So we'll log in here. And we'll go to the script schedule, and you can see that I just created this one, and on December 1st at 7:32. And if I dig in here, you can see it's disabled because I scheduled it in the past. But it simply just calls this FileMaker script, start scheduled migration, and it passes an ID. And the ID is this record that we are on right here. So you could also use this technique to create a script schedule that is a manual script schedule. You don't even need to open Migrator at that point. Let's say you've got your Migrator config, and all you do is you just run the same thing with no changes to it. You might run it on a Wednesday, and then again on a Friday, and then on a Monday. If you have this script schedule in here, you can just simply check the box and run it. Now, if I were to run this, I would get the indicator that it's running there, but I would also get an indication that we are in an unknown state. It's running on the server now, and we have a history record showing that it is started. And pretty soon, I think I set this timeout to, or the refresh interval to 15 seconds. So it checks out every 15 seconds. I think this one might take maybe a little bit longer than 15, in which case we should get an answer at right about 30 seconds. And there we go. So it was successful. I didn't even need to have this file open. So sometimes I use the scheduling feature to just simply create this. But you don't even need to use that. I mean, that's just kind of a shortcut that we created for you using the FileMaker Server admin API to create a schedule. You could just simply create one yourself, call it whatever, run a migration, and you're just going to choose migrator, and you're going to choose the script. Well, I guess I better plug in an account name and password. And you ever use this technique? I use the browser find. I think it's perform migration. Or maybe it's just, oh, I think it's start migration. Let me see, start. So that's the button that would start a migration from the interface. But I think we want to, oh, I think it's called something like scheduled migration. Or scheduled migration, there it is. So I use the browser find to find the script that's in here because the FileMaker Server admin console doesn't give us a little search box at the top. And then I would just simply put some JSON in here, and this would be in this kind of format here. And this is a UUID. And optionally put a timeout there. So you can see that I've just done the same thing manually that FileMaker or that Migrator did for me automatically. So, all right, let me pause for a second. I'm sure there's some questions at this point, or comments, or random thoughts.
This is looking pretty good. I guess I have a question. What if you wanted to do 2 migrations in a row? I guess would you just have to schedule them one behind the other? So for example, if you wanted to do one migration, wait for a script to finish, and then do a second migration. For example, if you wanted to split a field into 2 different fields and then remove a field after the data was moved.
Yeah, in most cases, you can structure your migration so all that happens at once. You definitely don't want multiple migrations trying to run on the same server. So you'll want to stagger them in some way. And if you're not going to be running them manually, as in clicking through the buttons and clicking start migration, and then when that one's done, do the other one. That's the simplest version of that. But if you're going to schedule them, and what we often do with scheduling is, I'll give you an example, would be like refreshing a staging server. And our staging servers, maybe we want to refresh them on a schedule Monday through Friday. They update the latest data from production and then your latest development snapshot from dev. So we stagger them so that you can bring over copies from production and then maybe a 5-minute buffer in between, and then the next one runs after that. There currently is no automatic way to daisy chain them together, but with something like Simple Queue, which I'll kind of give you a glimpse of here towards the end of the demo, you could do some really creative automations that might trigger one thing, and then that thing fires off a kind of a webhook of sorts. Well, actually, exactly a webhook that would trigger the other one to run. So you could completely automate it with just a little bit of work. But Migrator out of the box, somewhat core functionality, right? It was designed as a kind of your base workflow, and then all of the unique things that you do would be things that you build on top of that. Does that make sense?
Yep, that does.
All right. So I want to hear from anybody who is in the meeting that is doing live development still.
Now we do on some clients for certain fixes and changes on things.
All right. So that's a good point, right? When you have a separate dev server and you're in a production environment and there's you just deployed a big update and there's a bunch of stuff that's broken. You're going to run into these types of challenges, right? And it's always a question of what can you get away with as a hot fix, even when you're doing your work in a development server, because something it's sometimes maybe it's just a simple layout change or something like that. As a rule, we try not to do any schema changes, especially adding tables or fields or anything like that. You don't want things getting, you don't want IDs getting out of order. Even though the FileMaker data migration tool prefers name matching first, it will fall back to IDs if a name doesn't match. We want those really to be, that type of schema change to be created in a dev environment as a best practice. Obviously, if you deploy something, it's mission critical and you can't do another deployment for a number of hours and somebody is, they're blocked and they can't get their work done, you might have to make some decisions. So sometimes these conversations kind of veer off into really development strategies instead of migrator and Otto. Feel free, if you start to think about like, how do we deploy Monday, Wednesday, Friday when we're developing a big feature that's not going to be ready for a month? You know, these are some of the types of things that really come up when you have a split dev and prod environment. And we can talk about ways that you can structure your workflow so that you can still do all of those things. All right. So I have more to demo. Any questions on migrator or Otto or anything you've seen so far before I move on?
Hey, this is Michael. I'll throw a question at you since
Sure.
you're we've got one project that I'm helping someone out with, and it's a 2-file solution. One is it's one file. They've only ever done all their development on production. It's a nightmare file. So we ended up adding an interface file that redid the interface and added a little bit more functionality, but the schema and everything else is in the main first file. And there are 2 developers on the team that simply just won't take the time to do anything on development. They just keep on going to production. So one file, it's always done kind of the quote right way, and the other file, people are going on to production. So could we sort of, it sounds like I could set something up where I can, if I know that something's been done on production, I can get that file and put it on dev, and then
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
What you would do, let's see if I have one. I'll just create a new one, because what you would do is create a migration that's copies from prod to dev, and you would go in reverse and you'd pick the file that you want. In this case, it would be your data file, and it would be a copy. And then you would just run that whenever you need to. So if you know that schema has changed over there, then you could just bring back a copy.
Perfect. I get it. Thank you.
It's less than ideal.
Well, hey, I'm it's a losing battle, and I'm about to stop fighting the war. But in the meantime, I thought I'd ask if for a possible Band-Aid. So
yeah, quite frankly, in that kind of environment, I don't know what I would do. I think I would probably say this is not the right kind of project for me.
Yeah,
there's just so much risk.
Yeah.
From doing live development. We've gotten really good at it because we had to. That was the only way that we could do things before.
Right.
So we got really good at it, but it never quite sat right with me. It was always like, hey, there is just no better way to do this because there's just too much data to do table imports. So yeah, your mileage may vary.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's been for like 10 years, I haven't done any development on a production environment. And now I'm kind of in a new universe, and I've got a couple clients that are doing that. And I'm gracious. I'm backing out. I just wanted to ask.
Yep. Absolutely. All right. Okay. So I'm going to shift gears from migrator. We're going to go back to Otto. We're going to cover some of the features that are in Otto. I think I've got just enough time for this demo. So let's take a look at what is different. So migrations is in Migrator. So we looked at some brief history, but you get a little bit more here. You've got a lot more detail on the results and the files and the stages of the migration and what was successful and what wasn't. Here's the same log that you got in Migrator. This is a timeline migration log showing you everything that happened. So this is useful if something went wrong. And then if you want to restore the backup from this migration, so like you kicked it off and you realize there was a showstopper bug immediately and nobody has made changes in any of the files that you've migrated, you could just restore this from the backup. And this will do a reverse. It just reverses everything that happened and grabs the backup copy of the file that Otto stored at the beginning of the migration and replaces that. And if you performed a migration and then you realized right away that there was a bug and you fix it in dev, and you don't even have to go back to Migrator. You could just simply repeat it right from here. Okay. So that's the migrations view. Let's take a look at the file manager, which exposes the FileMaker backups folder, which is kind of nice, right? So I can go to any file right there and I can just download it. So you can't do that with the FileMaker Server admin console. Any of the saved files. We can also grab log files and download those, but there's a much better way to view logs. And in fact, this log viewer is arguably a little bit better than what FileMaker Server gives you. So even if you're just looking at the event log, this refreshes in real time. It's real fast, and it provides a search utility. So if you wanted to find all the messages that applied to security, we can see how many matches there are. They highlight. Yeah, it's kind of neat. We can inspect any of the FileMaker. I'm going to remove that because that search kind of gives you a little delay. We can inspect any of the FileMaker Server logs, but we also can inspect any of the Otto logs. Like if there was a problem, maybe it's going to be in the error log. Okay. You probably saw these two logs, and if you notice them, you probably are wondering what those are. And I'm going to demo that in just a second. Some extra config will save you from having to go to a command line if you need to enable or disable XML or PHP, some of these legacy options. And this is the really cool thing. So FileMaker, FileMaker's data API is based on sessions. Doesn't have the ability to create a token and just use that token for somewhat more persistent connections, right? So if we download this demo file to our desktop, I'm going to use the local version. I believe this is admin. And the Otto URL in this case here is, and actually I think for the purpose of this demo, I'm going to switch over here because I did some stuff on demo 1 earlier. So I'm just going to copy out just this part, just a host name. It'll fill all that stuff in for me. Or you can copy the whole URL. Now this is the FileMaker Server admin credentials. So I'm going to go here. Hopefully I got that right. This will confirm that. You are able to connect. Great. And now I can test the data API, and that's perfect, right? You can get a list of files. And SimpleQ is something that Todd has been working on a lot, and we're going to be promoting extensively here. We're just going to scratch the surface in this demo based on the time allowed. But now I'm going to get an API key from here, and you can see that it just popped right in there. I had one in from earlier. We'll test that connection using the data API, using our long-lived API proxy key. So now we don't even have to worry about sessions, right? So this is much, much simpler if you want to use Postman to communicate with your files. Now, there's also another feature. I'm going to get into the API key here in just a bit. We have support for webhooks, which is really cool. But while I'm in this demo file, I'm just going to show you the app logger. So if I go over to the configuration page, and I'm going to copy the app log token. And go to the log viewer, and we go to app info log. We have a couple demo buttons here. So imagine your FileMaker solution, it might run server side. You might want to log things on the server, and you don't have access to the file API, the file scripts in FileMaker if it's running on the server. So this is a way that you can log things to the application log. That's a sample new message right there. So every time I click this button, you can just see it showing up live in your app log. This would make your debugging of scripts that run via PSOS or through the web publishing engine a lot easier. Here's a sample error. So there's a 301 record log. And if you look at the app error log, it's going to show you just your errors. You can clear that log and start over. And I'm going to send another error through. How cool is that, right? So when we talk about Otto being a DevOps tool, primarily, secondarily, it does data migrations. But there's a lot of ways you can do data migrations. There's not a lot of ways that you can do this very, very simply, right? A lot of people will create a FileMaker log file, and you'll send scripts to that, and you'll maybe perform a script in that file and not wait for a response. That would be one common way of logging things, but this is just a lot better because it's just a text file on the server. You don't have all that extra overhead. All right. Any questions on the app logging? All right, we're moving right along. So now we'll just open the simple queue file. And we'll go to the message queue. I'm just going to delete all of these. So with webhooks, you can imagine some pretty complex workflows that might come from third-party web services. I set up a couple demo requests here in Postman. And really all we are doing right here is we're using the API key, which is a bearer token. That handles the authorization. You can see a very simple format. The Otto docs describe the format for the information that you are sending. You use a slightly different version of these URLs, and I've got a couple of them that I am going to demo for you. So in this case, it's a real simple body. I have it set to raw JSON, and you've got a simple JSON object, and I'm going to send this through. And you can see the message showed right up in the simple queue database. Now, simple queue, if you are interested in maybe digging into this a little bit more, it's a publish, subscribe, or pub/sub kind of approach to queuing the things that need to happen in your FileMaker solution. And it doesn't have to just be incoming webhooks from outside, third-party services. It could be from within your system. So sometimes you're maybe posting things and you don't have to get an immediate response. And one simple way to improve performance, especially on a WAN connected system, is simply to publish, to send that message off to simple queue. It's basically just an inbox, and let simple queue choose where to send that based on the subscribers and channels, and it will queue those things and they will just go through. And the nice thing about that is that if there are conditions that prevent some of those messages from going through, once you resolve that, maybe a file's closed or something like that, or you have a bug in a script, you could resend some of those messages through. So if I come back to Postman and every time I hit send, you're just going to see within a second, more messages show up in that queue, and that's the object that I sent. But wait, there's more. This is really exciting. You can do file uploads to your FileMaker server. And how many times have you needed to do that from an outside service? You may have jumped through some hoops, like, God forbid, sending the image data or the PDF files as a base64 encoded image, and you're dealing with, very large PDF files and performance issues and storage space requirements and stuff, and you have to decode those to put it into a container field. So here's an example of a file upload where the file is this one right here on my desktop. Right? Here it is. It's just an image. But you can see that the format of the data that we're posting is form data. So I can put arbitrary keys and values into that payload. And when I send that through, you can see that what we are getting right here is a JSON object. Let's take a look at that formatted. So there's the first and last name fields. But we also have an array of uploaded files. And we have a path that you could use server-side, insert from URL. Here it is, just JSON get element from the payload. We grab the first file out of there as an example. There is the path that you would use in order to insert that into a container. So you could have third-party services, you could have FileMaker, your FileMaker application, posting data to SimpleQ using the webhook interface with or without binary data. And you don't have to go through complex configurations or writing any web services to get this done. It's all made possible with Otto. Now, SimpleQ is maybe a little bit overkill for this demonstration, but it looks nice. And it provided a simple way for me to demo those messages coming in. You might have a very simple inbox need. And the Otto docs, which are at ottofms.com, you go to documentation, and if you just press Command K, we could just say webhooks. Otto docs describe to you the steps that you need to take. Some of these I demoed to you, but if you were to create your own FileMaker file or simply modify an existing file, you would add a layout to it, and then you would add a script to it that matches that so that Otto knows where that's going and what script to call after the record is posted. All right, so now I've shown you an awful lot. And we are just close to time. I'm assuming that we're stopping at 5 o'clock Pacific time. Is that right, David?
Yep, that's our usual target, about an hour.
Okay. So my demo's done. We'll use the last couple minutes for any last questions, comments. And I'm experiencing stunned silence. Either I blew you away and you're trying to think of how you might use all these features, or you're already doing this. And I just didn't read the audience correctly.
Well, I'll make a comment that, so this last bit with SimpleQ and uploading a file, I mean, yeah, I do that a ton, and it's all with AWS, and this is a lot more straightforward.
It's very, very simple. Yeah. Yeah. You're like, oh man, I did all that myself. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is kind of like the icing on the top of your cake, right? You got Otto, and that's your base. You need Otto anyway, because you're doing this split dev production model. But these other features they really add a ton of value.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I use Otto, but I'm really interested in the API option, the webhooks, and that SimpleQ looks exciting as well.
Yeah, if you're interested in having us come back for a more full-featured demo of SimpleQ, we'd be happy to do that. And we can get into some of these options here for subscribers. So you can think of workflows where messages get posted to Slack, or you receive information from Typeform, that kind of thing. And then we have channels that publish into a queue, and then you can see your message queue. And if there was any failures, you could retry that stuff. All right, Andrew says simple queue demo would be good. We'd love it too.
We'll get it scheduled.
All right. Any last questions, comments? We've got less than a minute left.
Thank you.
All right. It's my pleasure.
This is really great. Thank you very much.
Thanks for showing up.
Thank you.
Yeah, and for everyone here, Dave, thank you very much for presenting. This was really great to see, and seems like a really useful tool. For everyone here, we do these meetings on the first Wednesday of every month at 7 p.m. Eastern. Technically, we're the Atlanta FileMaker Developers Group, but everybody is welcome to join everywhere. We have a Google Groups link that you can join. I think we posted that in some of the places where we posted this meeting announcement. Or you can send me an email, david@bluefeathergroup.com, and I'll add you onto our mailing list to where we send out the meeting announcements. If you have anything that you'd like to see, also please email me. If you have anything you'd like to share, anybody you know who has something interesting to share, we're always looking for speakers. That's one of the hardest parts of putting a group like this together. So any suggestions and input on that kind of thing is greatly appreciated.
Hey, David, I thought I'd also mention, I hang out every Friday afternoon at 1 p.m. Pacific for up to an hour. We just call it office hours. And people swing by and talk about migration stuff. It doesn't have to be auto specific. Sometimes we talk about the weather. But I'll send you a link and you can share that out. So if anyone here picks up auto and wants to learn more and has some additional questions, they can swing by office hours and we will share it with the group so everyone kind of learns at the same time.
That sounds really good.
All right.
All right. Thanks a lot, everyone, and hope to see you all next month.
Thanks,
Actually, next
Dave.
month.
Thanks, David.
When is our next? Let's see here. What day is our the next one? I think it's going to be January 5th. Looks like. So that'll be our next meeting. Thanks a lot, everyone.
All right. Bye now.
Have a good night. Bye.